Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and if you're a frequent viewer of L'Chaim, you know I have the opportunity to sit in conversation with some of the most wonderful people in the Jewish world, individuals who are making a marvelous contribution to Jewish life and who are truly helping to shape the Jewish future. And on this edition of L'Chaim, I'm enormously pleased to be sitting with one of the outstanding figures on the world Jewish scene, who's done some remarkable things through her immense journalistic talent, both as a thinker and as a writer, coupled with her profound Jewish soul and her commitment to the Jewish people, which has been most important and persuasive, making her an important voice in Jewish life today. Her name is Jane Eisner. She is the editor-in-chief of The Forward, the nationally distributed Jewish weekly newspaper and online Jewish news website that's recognized as a major source of news and of liberal opinion in the Jewish world. Let me tell you a little bit about Jane Eisner. Her very impressive journalistic career dates back to her years as an undergraduate at Wesleyan University, where Jane became the first female editor of the college newspaper. Jane also has a master's degree from Columbia University's School of Journalism, where she now serves on the alumni board. For 25 years, Jane Eisner was with the Philadelphia Inquirer, Philadelphia's Pulitzer Prize-winning secular daily newspaper, before becoming the first woman editor-in-chief of The Forward, a position she's held since 2008. Jane's written many editorials that have earned her national and regional awards, and she's the author of Taking Back the Vote, Getting American Youth Involved in Our Democracy, published by Beacon Press. And I've already told Jane I'm a big fan of hers. And I've watched her moderate panels. I've seen her editorials in The Forward. I've seen her host at the 96th Street Y. You may have seen her on JBS Shalom TV with Meirav Michaeli at the SAJ in New York. She's been a participant on many panels herself. Jane also hosts her own talk show, The Salon, on the Jewish Channel, a subscription video-on-demand network. And I've long wanted Jane at this table so that you could get to know this very special human being. Jane Eisner, thank you so much for making the trip out here. I am very grateful.
Mark, I have never received an introduction like that.
Oh, that's so sweet.
I want your viewers to know that I didn't write it.
No, you didn't. I wrote it.
Thank you very much. It's really, really kind.
Well, that's sweet of you. I am, again, a huge fan. I think what you do, both in terms of your writing and your speaking, is Yotzei min haklal. It is out of this world. And I want to talk to you about some of these substantive things you talk about. First, I want to just talk a little bit about you personally, how you come to be Jane Eisner. Where were you born?
I was born in the Bronx.
Really?
Yes, I was born there, lived there till first grade. Then my family moved to Mount Vernon, where I lived, graduated high school there.
That's where you went to high school?
Yes.
Okay. Were you in a synagogue at that point?
I was. A synagogue called the Free Synagogue of Westchester.
I know it well.
Now has merged with another synagogue, but
Who
it's
was the
still
rabbi
there.
there when you were there?
Well, I had some amazing rabbis there. Rabbi Leon Chick
Yes.
was the rabbi when we first joined.
Yes.
And then I think the most important rabbi to me was Rabbi Max Hausen.
Yes.
Who is just an extraordinary man.
I knew him very well, very well. He was a very dear man and very bright, and you were very
I know.
You know, there are many wonderful rabbis in America and really around the world. And there's some who are not wonderful, as in every line of work. If a young woman gets to be with a rabbi who is really dynamic and thoughtful and passionate, it can really influence the way a person views Judaism, yes?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Rabbi Hausen really took time to be with us. You know, I went through confirmation class, and he really spent a lot of time with us. We'd go on retreats, we'd study a lot. It was great. And I think that was a moment when, in Reform Judaism, I no longer belong to Reform Synagogue now. I consider myself a conservative Jew. But I think at that time, Reform Judaism was really finding its voice in terms of social justice and speaking out. In his case, it was, he took a very early and controversial stand against the Vietnam War. And I think I was too young to know whether or not I agreed with him, but I so admired the strength of his convictions,
and the passion.
And yet he was never mean about it, dogmatic, always very open and welcoming. Really, a very powerful, important figure for us.
You were very lucky. Friends called him Buddy. Did you know that?
Oh no, I didn't.
Yeah, Buddy Hausen. Anyway, you were very lucky to have him, and I'm very glad. Were you an only child? Did you have siblings? What?
I have a younger sister, 2 years younger than I am. We are extremely close.
That's lovely.
And yeah, that was just the two of us.
And who were your parents? What are their names?
My father was Max Eisner. My mother was Sadie Eisner. She never liked the name Sadie, so she went as Stevie, which would often confuse people when they thought I had two male parents. And
what were they like? What were they like?
My father was born here on the Lower East Side, but his older siblings were born in Poland, and that's where his family came from. So he still had a bit of an immigrant in him. My mother was a full-blown immigrant. She was born and raised in Leeds in Yorkshire in England, and we can actually date our family back to the early 1800s in Yorkshire, which is about as far as Jews can go there. And she emigrated to this country after World War II. Even though my father served in the military in Europe, they didn't actually meet until here, until in New York.
Did they lose family in the Holocaust?
Not directly. My mother certainly lived through war and deprivation in England, and several of her brothers served in the British military.
I see.
It's possible that other members of my father's family perished, but because most of his family emigrated here before World War II, we don't know for sure.
And what was the tenor of the home, the Jewish home they created for you and your sister?
It's interesting. You know, I think both of my parents grew up Orthodox. My father in a very strictly Orthodox home, and he couldn't really continue that way as an adult. I think part of it was the sort of force of assimilation. I think part of it was intellectually he questioned a lot. So they gravitated towards the Reform Synagogue in our community, as I mentioned, Free Synagogue. It was the centerpiece of our life. My mother's, I think after marrying her daughters off to two nice Jewish guys, the most exciting day for her was when they asked her to be sisterhood president. So she really, the synagogue played a very big role in her life. And in our lives too, you know, many of our friends and the way things happen there, it becomes sort of a social core as well as a religious core. I was always wanting more. I was kind of annoying. Oh, I think it started in high school. I got more involved in the youth group at the conservative synagogue. USY. I went on USY on Wheels, cross-country tour between my junior and senior year in college, and that really affected me a lot. For the first time, I found religious Jews, observant Jews, who I thought were cool. I was the only Reform kid on the trip, and I really liked these other people, and I kind of wanted to be more like them. And I grew up in a home that had very strong identity and connection, as I mentioned, but also a certain antipathy towards some of the rules that my parents had discarded. When they first got married, they kept kosher basically to please my father's mother. His father by then had died, but his mother, my grandmother, was very religious. And she still didn't believe that my mother kept kosher well enough because she was English and they somehow didn't think she knew what she was doing. So she still wouldn't eat cooked food in the house. So then my parents said, well, forget it. And I grew up with 2 sets of dishes mixed all together and, you know, a grandmother who ate cottage cheese on a paper plate in the corner. So I had absorbed these sort of, I wouldn't say negative, but certainly skeptical attitudes towards religious observance. And then I'm exposed, you know, at a very impressionable age to this really engaging, meaningful, as I said, sort of cool way of being Jewish, and it really affected me. And I think it started to put my own observance on a different trajectory.
Again, it came from an experience you had with other people, and you warmed to them and their style. Did it create any friction for you with your parents?
Oh, I think I was kind of annoying, that year for Seder. I was saying to my mom, no, we can't have this in the house, we can't have that. But she indulged me. I think it led to different steps that my husband and I ended up taking that our parents, they didn't disapprove, they just didn't quite understand. We ended up raising our family in Marion, Lower Marion, just outside Philadelphia, where there are excellent public schools, and decided to send our children to day school instead. And at first my parents said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" I remember my mother, I said, "Well, I'm just going to send our oldest daughter to kindergarten there." And she said, "Jane, you do for one, you have to do for all." We had 3 children. She said, "Don't kid yourself. Once you start, you have to be prepared." I said, "Oh, no, we're just going to try it out." And of course, we ended up sending all 3 to day school through 12th grade. So she was right in that regard. But I think they didn't quite understand it. But once they saw how committed we were, the kind of environments we were raising our children in, they were extremely supportive.
I want you to talk about this for one more moment. And I want you to talk about it in a larger sense, not simply about your own parents. There are people, well-meaning Jews, who feel a good sense of Jewish identity, but they have a bias against the day school. They even have a bias against certain forms of Jewish observance. And in some way, that's what happened to your parents, because their instinct was to say to you, they probably never used these words, "Jen, you're becoming too Jewish." As you look at the American scene today, and on the one hand, we celebrate Jewish pluralism. On the other hand, there's a real concern that the Jewish community itself is somehow just dissipating slowly with the high rate of assimilation and the extent to which intermarriage does or does not push assimilation. As you think about your own journey, and then you look at where American Jewry is now, what would you hope American Jews understood more about why it's important, and what it was that you found that was so meaningful to you and your husband, that even though it was not the model you grew up with, you embraced a more traditional and a more observant form of Judaism?
Well, I think everyone has to find what's right for them. So I don't want to stand in judgment of other people, and nor do I want to preach. But I do think that we have an amazing tradition, and I think the problem is too many people don't know about it, haven't taken the time to learn, haven't prioritized it. I'm a huge supporter of day school. Our children went to a Salman Schechter school for elementary school and to a pluralistic school, Akiba Hebrew Academy. It's now called Barak. And it was the first and oldest pluralistic day school in the country, founded just after World War II. And I think it prepared them entirely to lead lives that are both Jewish and part of the broader world. And I think people too often have a mistaken idea about day school. They think it's ghettoizing. They think it's a narrowing process. Quite the opposite. I firmly believe that if you raise your children with a strong sense of who they are, with not just a nice feeling about being Jewish, but with language, with understanding. All our children spent a semester in Israel in high school. They're going to do what they want. They're grown women now. They're taking different paths. It's all out of my hands. But I know they know who they are and where they came from, and they can access the tradition whenever they want to.
In ways that you couldn't have.
Absolutely. My husband says, because he also grew up Reform and went on a similar journey, and we say we're always backfilling. We're always trying to catch up to where we were. And he's seriously studying Hebrew now, the Ulpan at the GCC, and because he's just feels like he wished he had this so much earlier on in life. And I think we ought not to be afraid of being particular. As I just look at my own daughters.
How many daughters do you have?
I have 3 daughters. I have a daughter who studied Italian in college. I have a daughter who studied Swahili in college, and I have a daughter who's a serious student of Arabic and now Farsi. They're not living in any kind of ghetto, but they really had, I hope they would agree, a really strong foundation in being Jewish, and then that prepares them to go on out in the world.
I want one more thing about you and your Jewish journey, and it was something you wrote, Bo, you write marvelously, and maybe we'll talk about how you came to be such a writer and whether it's easy or hard for you. Anyway, you wrote a piece that is right now, anybody can, you can access it on the Jewish Forward website. But you're writing about the recent, as we are taping, the recent event in Har Nof and the tragedy of the 4 rabbis, and there was one Druze policeman who was killed. And you write a very wonderful piece. Maybe we'll get to talk about it. But you have an aside in it. And this is the aside you wrote. You're talking about the rabbis who were praying, and they were attacked during prayer while they're davening. And you write, for those who know how to pray, and I confess, you write, that ability often eludes me. And when I read it, I thought to myself, first of all, you're courageous, Jane. And second, you wrote this, and you understand everything you write. You write for a purpose. You write for a reason. And I said to myself, what about the entire experience of prayer and your relationship, your personal relationship to the Jewish tradition, sort of propelled you to add that aside? Because if you had or had not put that aside in, it would have done nothing to the story. If your story had a larger purpose. But you wrote this maybe for yourself or maybe for the reader. I want you to talk for one moment about, number one, why did you write that aside? And how do you feel about prayer for yourself personally? And I know it's a very personal question, but
well, it is. But it's a very fair question because I asked for it. I wrote that because it's true. It happens to be something I've been thinking a lot about this year. I try to, without sounding too goofy, sort of try to set certain goals for myself each year. When we remember, my husband and I write them down. It used to be Rosh Hashanah. Now we give ourselves till Sukkot to actually write them down. But honestly, one of the things that I've just realized, I go to synagogue a lot, and I struggle with it. I struggle with, what am I saying, and am I really giving it the intention that I should, and are there ways in which I can get more out of this personally, but also do more with my prayer? So it happens to be something that's on my mind. I was just talking about this with some people on the prior Shabbat, and I also felt, I guess I included it because, for one thing is, I really want people to understand that I don't have all the answers either. And there was a lot of imagination that went into that piece because, as I said, I wasn't there. Because I'm a woman, when it comes to Orthodox prayer, I'm not in the middle there. And so I can only sort of close my eyes and imagine what it must be like. And so because of that, I felt like I couldn't sort of honestly say, I know what these men were doing just before this horrible thing happened. I can only say, I imagine that they were in a state of prayer, meditation, conversation with themselves, conversation with God. And that's something I aspire to. But, I'll be honest, sometimes I'm there and I'm there to see my friends. And sometimes I'm there because I'm just like waiting for it to happen to me or trying to open myself up to it. And I think those of us who care deeply about the practice of faith need to be honest that it's hard. It doesn't just come to you. I lost both my parents within a little more than a year of each other, and I said Kaddish just about every day for 11 months, first for my mother, then for my father. And, there were times when I had to drag myself there, and there were times when I was not really focused at all. But I think the reason for repetition is to invite ourselves constantly into that space, and we get better at it after a while. And I think there really is something important about showing up and trying all the time, and not expecting, lightning is going to strike, and if it doesn't, I need to stay home that morning. No, we're obliged to do this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you go to the synagogue frequently?
Now, I would say I pray. I go to synagogue once or twice a week, just usually on Shabbat, not during the week.
Okay. Where do you go now?
We belong to Anshe Chesed, to Minyan Ma'at, because we live on the Upper West Side. There are about like 5,000 other choices. So I would say there are other places that we go, and we're also part of a group that meets once a month for Kabbalat Shabbat in each other's homes.
Lovely.
So that's a different davening experience. So it's a mixture. But our affiliation is with Anshe Chesed.
Jane, why do you think most people come? When you go, whether it's a Saturday morning, whether you go to Kabbalat Shabbat, whenever you go, and you look around and there's a community of people surrounding you, why are most of them there, do you think?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's probably a combination. People go to pray, to be calm, to learn.
You think people go to pray?
Oh, I will. Oh, yes.
That's interesting. My experience is that very often people go for community.
Oh, there's no doubt that is a huge part of it, seeing your friends. And, we moved here from Philadelphia a few years ago, and, one of the things I miss most is sitting next to my best friend in synagogue.
Yeah.
And I'll admit that.
And have you ever considered, you and Mark, actually creating an Orthodox lifestyle for yourself, as opposed to being part of the conservative movement?
Oh, I think these labels start to get sort of silly after a while.
Absolutely.
I mean, certainly when we moved to the Upper West Side, and even when we were thinking about it, and anytime, because I lived here for 4 years and went back to Philadelphia most weekends, and about once a month he would come here. So each time we would take advantage, and we did everything. We went everything from Romamu, a Jewish renewal, service that meets in a church, to the Karlebach Minyan, to all sorts. And it was great. I really pushed myself out of my comfort zone. We went to B'nai Jeshurun and found that service really moving, even though I was not used to going to a service where instruments were played. I went to Darchei Noam on a number of occasions and found that service really wonderful too, even though I don't really like a mechitza. And so it's been a great experience for us. I think we gravitated, frankly, towards a shul that had most of the qualities that our prior shul had, which was a very strong chavra, Minyan Ma'at, within a larger shul with a fantastic rabbi, Jeremy Kalmanovsky. And just that combination was really meaningful to us. But I think that, nothing is static. You take on, as we have, kind of new practices, you try them out, you challenge yourself. We lived in London for a few years when I was a foreign correspondent, and there we were part of the new North London synagogue, which I suppose in American terms, there it was called Masorti. I think in American terms it was more like Darchei Noam, or the kind of more liberal wing of modern Orthodoxy. Right. So a lot of it is just about where you are in life and what kind of meaning you're looking for.
I just hope everybody hears you, because the journey you have described for yourself and your husband, in so many ways, I wish it were a journey people would take just as a rule. Mm-hmm. And, you happen to live in New York, and there are many people who are watching us who are outside of New York. Mm-hmm. And in New York, there is this smorgasbord of opportunity where you can really find a kahila, a congregation where you really are comfortable. And you went and you experimented, and you have found a place where you're really happy. But I hope people hear the model you represent. And I'm very proud of you, and I'm impressed. I hope that becomes a model for more and more on the American Jewish scene. So, kol hakavod. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now I want to talk to you about as a journalist. You've had a career that has been both in the secular world and the Jewish world. And I had some of the similar experiences you did. I started at WMCA radio, a secular radio station that had nothing to do with Jewish. And for me, there was always a pull. I always wanted to do that kind of work in a Jewish context. And so ultimately it led to L'chaim, and then it led to finally Shalom TV JBS. So I see you spent 25 years at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and you were all over the place, and you were doing major work in journalism in the larger world. And I said to myself, I wonder what it was that enabled you to accept the offer to become the first woman editor-in-chief of what I believe is it may be the most significant national Jewish publication newspaper on the American Jewish scene today. Tell me how that happened, and whether there was any ambivalence in you moving from the secular journalistic world to the Jewish journalistic world.
Well, thank you for asking. There was an intermediate step there, so I'll get to that in a minute. I served 25 years in the Philadelphia Inquirer. I loved it. I spent about 10 years, roughly, as a reporter and a foreign correspondent, another 10 years as an editor, features editor, and I ended up running the editorial board for 5.5 years. I then stepped down from that. Really, it was partly professional, but a lot of it was personal. I still was going to work. I was still going to work at the Inquirer. I just needed a more rational lifestyle. And fortunately, I was able to have that. And so I was a national columnist for 5 years. That's when I wrote my book. I also taught at the University of Pennsylvania in the government department. And the truth is that I left the Philadelphia Inquirer at the end of 2005, along with many others. There was a buyout, one of many, that were offered. And by then I had become disillusioned with journalism, with daily journalism.
Because?
So many things. I think the financial pressures, the narrowing of the scope. It wasn't clear that after the latest round of buyouts that I was going to be able to keep my column. You know, after all this time, I didn't want to go back and just to do the things I'd already done. And yet I was still young enough to make a change. And it just happened to coincide with other things. My mother had died, my father was sick. You know, I was like, you reach that point in life where you just say to yourself, if I'm going to try something new, let me try. So I did. And in fact, I left the paper at the end of that year and went to work at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, which is a wonderful museum and education center dedicated to telling the story of our Constitution and its relevance today. And I was vice president for all the programming. And it, satisfied the civic nerd in me. I got to hang out with the founding fathers. I learned a lot about nonprofit management. I would say after a couple of years there, I was starting to really miss writing. I had started to think about maybe doing another book and whatever. I only say that because I think when you recognize there's something missing in your life and then someone gives you a call that might satisfy it, you're much more likely to accept that call. And that's truly what happened. Out of the blue, I got this call from Sam Norwich, the publisher, who says, do you want to apply for this? And we had been readers for years and years, really ever since the English Forward began in 1990. And at that point, my youngest daughter was a senior in high school. I would never have considered taking a job outside of Philadelphia before then. And, talked it out with my husband. It was like, well, we'll see. And there ensued months of conversation and whatever. Things don't move too fast at the Forward. That's okay. So by the time I actually was offered the job and was starting it, she had, in fact, graduated high school. And I started the week after. And it really came at a perfect time for me. I wanted desperately to be involved in journalism. Frankly, I wanted to run something myself. That was a little frustrating where I was. And I also felt like it was my time to give back to the Jewish community. And anybody who knew me well was like, oh yeah, of course she is going to do this. It gets journalism and Jewish together for her at last. Frankly, I'm glad I did it at an older age. I think it's tough. People really are mean, and they come after you in all sorts of personal ways. And I think I have better perspective on it, that now. But mostly I just think it's a gigantic privilege. I mean, I literally did my senior project in college about Jewish immigrant life on the Lower East Side. I read about Ab Khan back then, you know, when I was 20 years old. So for me, this was like so beshert that I should come and be able to carry on this tradition. How could I possibly say no?
Oh, I get chills, Jane. That's a lovely story. I didn't understand the detail. That's wonderful. And it was, you know, it's also beshert for the Jewish community because you're in the right place at the right, you are in the right place at the right time. But when you were a young kid studying at Wesleyan and then you went to Columbia School of Journalism, was there an idealistic notion that, you know, the Woodward and Bernstein type journalism that really changed American life in the 1960s? And then we can, whether we mourn the passing of it or not, was any of that part of what drove you?
Oh, yes, although, I mean, Woodward and Bernstein, you know, Watergate was the early 70s, and I was already hooked as a journalist, wanting to be a journalist even before then. You know, my hero was Edward R. Murrow.
Yes.
The legendary broadcaster. And I gobbled up everything about him, read biographies, listened to his broadcasts, radio and television. When I teach, I've taught about journalism at Penn and at Wesleyan, and I subject my students to probably way too many hours of watching See It Now. I have a big collection of CDs from that. And I really, really admired his journalism. It was a different kind of investigative journalism. Certainly the work that he did to bring down Joe McCarthy was very much akin to kind of Watergate. But to me, what he also did was bring his listeners and then eventually his viewers to you know, to places where they absolutely needed to go. I mean, if any of your viewers have the chance, they should read his account of the liberation of Buchenwald. It is stirring. It is absolutely stirring. And I'm not going to say it as eloquently as he is, but he started out the radio broadcast saying, I know you're going to be listening to this at your breakfast table. This is going to be difficult, what I'm going to tell you. Just want to make sure you know. It's like he took you there. And when he wrote about race in America, I mean, he was actually a beautiful writer, but when he did these broadcasts about the oppression of farm workers, about so many things that were troubling in our society, and the pieces were long. These were like hour-long programs. Who does that anymore on TV? I mean, except for you, of course. You know, really serious work, and that was just enormously impactful on me. And I really consider him to be the person who I most admired growing up and was a model for me.
That's gorgeous. You've picked, you know, the icon, as you said, the model. It's not the same anymore, Jane. Journalism is not the same.
Oh, no.
And I'm not talking about Jewish journalism. I'm talking about American journalism.
It isn't. And there are things that I lament that have passed, and there are other ways in which the changes in journalism are amazing and exciting and a gift. It's like everything else in life. It is such a mixed blessing. And you just sort of have to grab onto the positive and not dwell on the negative.
All right. Did you grow up a classical liberal Jew?
You know, I guess so. It's not like I had a label on. I think I grew up in a family that was liberal and I guess voted Democratic. I'm not even sure I discussed that with my parents. You know, we were just taught at an early age to look out for other people. We grew up, I guess you would say, sort of lower middle class, but I wasn't, it never stopped me. And I think one of the things that I find, I think the thing I find most concern in American society today is the growing inequality, not just economic, but inequality of opportunity. And I think about my father, who grew up really, really, really poor, really poor, and yet was able to go to City College of New York when it was as hard to get into as Harvard. And then after serving in the military, went to Columbia School of Optometry on the GI Bill. I think about myself and my sister. We both were able to go to private universities, which my father paid for entirely. We graduated with no debt from that. I mean, I had to pay for grad school, and he was able to do that on a single salary. My mother really didn't work until much later. And college was affordable. It was a stretch, I know, for him, but it was affordable. And now I see, I think about my grandson, just even in the Jewish world, my daughter and son-in-law would like to send him to Jewish school. They are not at all sure that they can afford it. And, he's barely walking, so we haven't discussed college yet. But I see how hard that is for him. And not just for us, because we're still quite privileged in this society as white people. But I see how difficult it is to close that gap for those who don't have these advantages. And that really concerns me a lot.
Mm-hmm. The reputation, the understanding people have of the Forward is that it is on the liberal end of the Jewish spectrum. Do you have any problem with that description?
No, we jokingly say we're on the right of the left. How is that? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So, and my publisher, Sam Norwich, says that. I would say we're center left, whatever that might mean. As I just described, I think it this background of feeling that it's our obligation to work for a more equitable society is very, very much in keeping with the foundation of the Forward in 1897 as a Yiddish newspaper that was concerned tremendously about immigrants and equality and social justice, very connected to the labor movement, and very much in love with America. I always say, if you read Kahn's work, he was in love with America and tried very hard to bring his readers into that fold, but also to hold America up to its promise. I think that when it comes to politics regarding Israel, we're also center to left. I think we probably agree more with Labor than Likud, but it's kind of hard to figure out all of those distinctions right now. You may know I was very involved with the Pew Research Center's study that was published a year ago. And
in fact, you were one of the individuals who really pushed Pew to do it.
I did. I knew the people at Pew and respected them enormously because of my time in Philly. And I was just very frustrated after a few years at the Forward that everyone was saying, the American Jews think this, the American Jews say that. And I was like, really? Can we have some data here? Like, I was totally agnostic about how it was going to come out. I just wanted to have some reputable data. And it turns out that Pew, while they've studied many other religious and ethnic groups, hadn't studied the Jews. And so it was just a wonderful, wonderful gift, I think, that they gave us. It's still bearing fruit.
Absolutely.
But when you look at the attitudes that the majority of Jews express in that survey, whether it's about caring about the stranger, caring about genocide, caring about social justice and economic equality, loving Israel but being critical of the current Israeli government, I feel like we are squarely where most Jews are. We don't run our news organization according to public opinion polls, but it is gratifying when an excellent poll like that sort of affirms that we are at least connecting to a large chunk of American Jews.
I'm reluctant to ask such a general question, but I mean it in the broadest sense. You love America? You do love America.
Oh, me? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And but that's very clear in many things you've written and done. You love Israel?
Yes.
Okay. You come from a perspective where you love America and you love Israel.
Yeah.
You can love both and be critical of both.
Yes.
Okay. At the moment, Are you critical of things that the Israeli government is doing?
At this very moment?
Yes.
I mean, this has been a hard week.
Yes, we're taping right after Har Nof. Okay.
Yes.
And there was another attack even today as we're meeting. But step out of this week.
Okay. I mean,
we come out of the summer with the war in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
The peace process seems to me to be in a shambles.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering whether in that context, do you say to yourself, there's no peace in Israel. There's no peace in the Middle East between Israelis and Palestinians because of Israel's reluctance to do X, Y, and Z, because Prime Minister Netanyahu won't do A, B, and C. And I really want to get a sense of where you see the problem to be and how you are critical of Israel at the same time that you love Israel. So I want you to speak about that for a moment.
Sure. I said this was a hard week, and I understand that some people might be seeing this a little bit later,
yes.
but it wasn't just hard because, of these just horrific deaths and all of what that represents. And I think I wrote an editorial, a personal one, a couple of days ago saying, it feels different this time.
Yes.
And I think it does. And I think that's a feeling I have gotten from a lot of people.
And expand on that. And that's the piece.
Well, I think it feels different because of what happened, because these were men at prayer at their most vulnerable. But it also feels different because this was targeting Jews and Judaism. When you go to as I said in the piece, and I'm not excusing or minimizing death and destruction in any other venue, but if you blow up a bus or a restaurant, you don't know who else might be there. You go to a prayer service at 7 in the morning in an ultra-Orthodox shul, you know who's going to be there. And so I think it is fair to say that felt like not just an attack on Israel in a political sense, and I think the politics of it were deranged, but I think it felt like an attack on Jews and Judaism, and that feels different. I haven't honestly processed yet how that feeling, which right now is just kind of pure emotion, then gets translated analytically into policy. In the past, I have been critical of the Netanyahu government specifically for the continued building of settlements in the West Bank. And I still believe that is a tremendous impediment to peace. And I'm not the only one that thinks that way. Most of the world thinks that way. The United States government thinks that way, and a whole lot of Israelis think that way. And I always go to Ramallah every time I'm in Israel, which is once a year. This last time when I was there in June at the media conference where you attended as well, I spent several days also talking to settlers all over. I was in Hebron, I was in Efrat, I was in Ariel, I was in Shiloh. I mean, I was all over. So, because I wanted to understand what was going on there. And I'm not saying I have an answer. I don't know what the answer is. I think that is the continued building of settlements is a dramatic impediment to peace. So, however, is Palestinian intransigence, Palestinian incitement, and a political inability to move on their side too. And I want people to understand that. Yes, I have been critical of specific policies of the Netanyahu government. I've also been critical of the policies and the behaviors of the Palestinian leadership when I think that has been called for. I don't do it in a tit-for-tat kind of way. I think that it's fair to hold our people more accountable to us. I do expect that Israelis and Israel will act better than everybody else. I do. I mean, we're still the only democracy in that region, and we have higher standards. And we don't want to be compared to Hamas. We don't want to be compared to the Muslim Brotherhood or other actors in that region who do act deplorably. And I'm not excusing their actions in the least, but that's not who we should be modeling after that, and that's not who we do model ourselves after. So, somebody might say, well, you're more critical of Netanyahu than Abbas. That may be true. I mean, please show me the details. But in a way, I also say perhaps that's right, but I feel that is what comes from love and understanding and a very legitimate expectation that we do act better, more morally, with a greater adherence to our values than we expect other people to do that. I constantly examine myself in this position. I try to read a lot. I try to listen to other people. We certainly publish different points of views on our pages, and I think that's very important for us to do that. But I also think it's important for us to express our opinions. Just one last thing that I also say a great deal. I'm expressing an opinion. I'm not telling the government what to do. It is not my right to do that. I don't live there. If I lived there, if I was paying taxes, my kids were serving in the army, and I was an Israeli living there and voting and whatever, then yeah, I'd have the right to tell Netanyahu or Rivlin or anybody what to do. I think we express our opinion. We express it as people devoted to Israel, but people who are Americans and living here, and connected, but only to a point. Just as I don't expect Israelis to tell me who to vote for in the American election, I would never in a million years tell Israelis who to vote for or what to do. I just think it's important because Israel does care about American opinion, and because we do have such a strong connection, that it's important for me to respectfully express an opinion that at times is an opinion of great solidarity, as we express this week, and then at times is also opinion that can be critical of specific policies.
I have never heard it said better. I thank you very, very much. And I would agree with 90% of it. I want to tell you the 10% I have trouble with.
Okay, sure.
And I'm very, very appreciative of the fact that you say, as an American Jew, you can express an opinion without feeling you're telling Israelis what to do. And I am often, it just makes me uncomfortable that American Jews, who, Jane, know very little about Israel, maybe they've never even been to Israel, have never walked the streets, have never interacted with Israelis, have never interacted with Palestinians in Israel or on the West Bank. They're going to tell Israelis whose lives are on the line what to do. I find the arrogance to be overwhelming, and what you've described is something very, very different, and there's a humility in what you say. And I believe if every American Jew approached it as you did, we'd be far, far better off. I've expressed something that bothers me enormously. And it doesn't mean I don't think American Jews don't have the right, as you say, to participate in the discussion. But often it's not about discussion. We're going to tell you what to do. Substantively, I've said I feel the building of settlements, and now I'm talking more about expanding settlements than building within existing settlement blocks. I have very little problem adding a second story to a building or a building within a certain geographic region. The question is, to what extent is it inappropriate for Israel to be expanding settlement growth on the West Bank? And it's not from me, Jane, because I believe anything is immoral about it or illegal about it. I believe it is politically unwise. Given the way the world is set up right now, it just isn't helping anything. At the same time, and I want to hear you speak to this, I am convinced that if tomorrow not one brick was laid, not one nail was hammered into any piece of wood, it would not make a difference in the way in which the Palestinian Authority at the moment, I'm now talking about as an established institution, that there is no one on the Palestinian side right now who is prepared for ideological reasons and for practical reasons to take any step further closer to a peace process with the State of Israel. And therefore, while I believe that for almost public relations reasons, it's not wise for Israel to keep building, and there are Israelis who sit with me and say we're not, that almost all of the construction is only within existing blocks. But whether they're accurate or not, even though I think it's unwise to be doing this, I still don't believe it's the obstacle. I believe the obstacle comes from some place totally other, and that the tragedy here is that you have Israelis and even an Israeli prime minister who is ready, if there were a real serious peace-loving interlocutor, I believe there would be peace in the Middle East. And if tomorrow there was never a settlement ever built again, it would change nothing. That's my perspective, but I'm happy to hear yours.
Well, I respect your perspective. I'm not sure that I agree that there's no difference in adding a story or adding more people to existing settlements, because the problem is, of course, that those existing settlements are on land that the whole world, including the United States, believes is illegally occupied. And then when you start to look at where a Palestinian state might be, it just adds more and more people to more and more Jews on land that Palestinians were hoping and expecting would be theirs.
Okay, just help me understand, because it may be important what you're saying. Every time I hear a discussion of how a peace settlement would work out, people say this to me. You know, Abbas knows, Netanyahu knows, everybody knows where the border is going to be, and they certainly know which, quote, settlements that ring Jerusalem, for example, Ma'ale Adumim, Efrat, where you've been. Everybody knows that in any kind of ultimate peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, those, quote, settlement blocks are going to remain part of Israel. And therefore, if in Efrat there's another family that does not extend the border of Efrat,
well,
and
but
it's going to be,
even that is disputed, though, because there's plenty of evidence to show that Efrat is expanding its borders. It says, well, this was our land anyhow, but we're just taking it, we're just now building on it. And I certainly saw that. And as we know, that there's many illegal settlements on the West Bank. There are settlements that supposedly, even in the eyes of the government, should not be there. The hilltop settlements that then end up growing and expanding, and suddenly they are facts on the ground.
and the other thing and I'll let you finish, because what you're saying is very important. I do dispute with you that the American government has said they're illegal. The Carter administration is the only American administration that ever used the word illegal.
Well, I'm not an expert in every single thing that's come out of the State Department, but it's occupied land. It's land that Israel won in 1967, promised to give back, and then didn't. And
well, they offered to give it back, though, many times, and couldn't.
Not at first, but certainly subsequently. And you're absolutely right. The Palestinians have rejected offers to settle this in the past. They have a pretty dysfunctional political setup there. They haven't had elections in many, many years. There's, of course, the tragic fighting between Fatah and Hamas. I mean, is this the ideal peace partner? No. Absolutely not.
And you're not disputing Khartoum, and that was immediately after the Six-Day War.
I mean, there are, yes. I mean, nobody's not guilty here at all. But look. I mean, Shimon Peres, who, when he stepped down from being president of Israel, had to have been the most popular political figure, like ever, maybe only surpassed by Ben-Gurion, but only in retrospect, because there's plenty of people that didn't like Ben-Gurion when he was around. I mean, Peres insisted and continues to insist that Mahmoud Abbas is a man of peace, that he is somebody that they, Israel, should negotiate with. Now, again, this week, Harnoff may have been a game changer. We don't know yet. I really want to preface that. But make sure that people understand that I'm saying that. But I think this idea that there's nobody on the Palestinian side willing to work with us is unfounded, and that people way smarter than me and with much more responsibility politically in Israel think the opposite. Certainly, I have met with Palestinian leaders who seem to know Israel politics extremely well and understand what needs to be done. And there's no doubt that there are things that Palestinians hold on to that are kind of deal breakers. You can't have a full right of return and expect to have a Jewish state of Israel. And and that has to be confronted. But there are things that Israel holds onto that are deal breakers from the Palestinian perspective.
For example?
Well, the status of Jerusalem, the fact that Israel considers so many settlements on the West Bank to be part of what ought to be part of a final agreement when a final agreement hasn't been finalized yet. So I can understand it from both points of view. Israel feels itself to be a victim, suffering an existential crisis in a really tough neighborhood. Palestinians consider themselves to have been occupied for more than 4 decades. That occupation, when you're there and when you talk to people about how it affects them, is very, very real. It's essentially invisible to most Israelis. That's in many ways a good thing. The security barrier has, until again, just recently, has decreased the number of terror attacks dramatically in Israel, but so has, according to the Israeli defense and security establishment, so has the increasing vigilance and competence of the Palestinian police. We can't ignore that. I mean, it's the defense and security establishment that has been actually at odds with the political establishment. My colleague J.J. Goldberg has done incredibly good work on this. He has terrific sources in that establishment, and much more than I can, reads the Israeli media in Hebrew all the time and sees what's going on there. And it's, a lot of my point of view, frankly, Mark, is taken not just from what I see and hear in my own reporting, because I'm only there like once a year and that's not enough, but is a lot from what I read from security and defense professionals who say that it is untenable for Israel to be ruling over another people. And yes, there have to be compromises on both sides, and they're surely not going to get all they want, and we're probably not going to get all we want. But your formulation at the beginning was the right one, which is that this it has to ultimately be a political settlement, and that's why you've seen people who say, yes, philosophically, religiously, I believe Jews should live anywhere they want. And I understand that. I understand that point of view. But then you have to say, okay, how do we maintain the character, defensible borders of a Jewish and a democratic state? And a state that's going to have a non-Jewish minority, but not a non-Jewish majority. And to do that, we have to pull back from a lot of these lands. I'm not smart enough to tell you exactly where. I've seen lots and lots of maps that everybody has. We've got to understand that we can't continue to do this, or the horrible fighting. I'm not excusing the terror and fighting at all, but we have to understand that there is some connection there. And again, that's something that I'm not just saying.
Okay.
Plenty of Israelis saying.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And again, I want to say this: you say it as well as anybody who sat at this has sat at this table.
Well, this is really hard, and I think the ground is shifting.
Yes, I do.
And we have to take advantage. I mean, we have to take that into consideration.
Okay. I just want you to react to one more thing. Mm-hmm. As I listen to you, first of all, I believe that if you and I separately put down on a piece of paper what we would want mm-hmm. for Israel and the Middle East, it would be very, very similar. And I believe that there was a time, first of all, when close to 80%, maybe even higher, of the Israeli people absolutely were in favor of a two-state solution, and mm-hmm. giving up the West Bank was no problem, mm-hmm. as long as they thought there was going to be an mm-hmm. honest peace. Mm-hmm. And what happened is that confidence has been eroded. Mm-hmm. But conceptually, I believe the Jewish people have said since the 1930s, we will share the land. Mm-hmm. And it's not about whether we feel it's ours or not. Practically speaking, there are two peoples here. The best way to handle this is to share the land. Mm-hmm. When I listen to you speak, mm-hmm. again, we don't disagree globally. There's a nuance, though. I have been amazed at how within the Israeli community, there's a difference of opinion. There are people who will argue from a security perspective, whether we keep the West Bank or not, whether they're at this border, that border, where the line is drawn. In terms of modern warfare, this is irrelevant. And I've heard security people and military experts say, no, it's very important, and that there are experts on both sides. And that's why I have a sense of humility here. You know, who am I to say? And it comes back to your original your point that you're not an Israeli, you don't live there, and your children don't serve in the army. But anytime somebody says to me, there are Israelis who say that, I know that that's true. You're not making that up. But there are 7 Israelis on the other side who say the opposite. So in my mind, those two cancel each other out. And then there's a larger issue. And this is the issue that pains me. I don't believe it's about redressing some kind of inequity in the Middle East. I don't believe fundamentally that it's about a blockade of Gaza or an occupation of the West Bank. I don't talk to any Israeli. I don't talk to any, Jane, who are in favor of the occupation. They want to be out. Israelis don't want their children in Gaza. They don't want their children in the West Bank. They just want it done with. And it's not about greater Israel. There's a very small percentage of Israelis who are worried about greater Israel. A very small percentage.
No, a lot of the settlers I talk to want to
Look,
stay right there.
I was in Karnei Shomron, and Karnei Shomron, to a person, said to me, I'd love to stay here. If Israel makes two states, there's a compromise and we have to leave, we leave. And if the Palestinians permit me to stay in Karnei Shomron under Palestinian sovereignty, I stay. I know there are some very right-wing fanatic settlers, but my sense of the overall settler community is you have people who are very reasonable and understand, and if they have a choice, they'll stay, and if they don't have a choice, they'll leave. And there'll be some instances where, just like Gaza, we had to, the Israeli soldiers had to take people off of roofs and throw them into trucks like they did in Yamit. They'll do it. But my point is the following. I don't believe it's about occupation or blockade. And that may be the real fundamental difference in how we view the problem. I believe it's what, it's the Bernard Lewis comment. If it was a territorial dispute, it would have been solved long, long ago. You have a people who basically reject the notion of any Jewish state on the West Bank.
Which people are you talking about?
I'm talking about both Hamas, to be sure, and the PLO charter is still a PLO charter.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of things in charters. I mean, every single thing
there's an incitement on Palestinian television on the Palestinian Authority website, which, if I wanted peace and I was a boss and I really wanted to convince the Israeli people that I wanted to live with them without hurting them, I would change it. You would change it.
Well, look, you need to ask Palestinian leaders these questions. I'm not here as their surrogate. I have asked them these questions, and I've examined their statements, and plenty of other people have as well. And there is an absolute acceptance of Israel, of the state of Israel. To say they deny Israel's existence in terms of the leadership of the Palestinian Authority is false. Are there things on a website that would change? I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of things that Israeli cabinet officials say.
No, that's not true.
Are pretty incendiary.
There's nothing in formal Israeli policy or on any formal Israeli website or on formal Israeli television that is anywhere not remotely the same.
Okay, I'm not sure that we can talk about these kinds of things in the abstract. I think that there are plenty of Palestinian leaders who want to make a deal with Israel. There are plenty who don't. There's a restive Palestinian public that has lived for more than 4 decades under somebody else's rule. And there's not just been a status quo. There are now 450,000 settlers, and that doesn't count Jerusalem. And many of the people that I spoke with, and I spoke to a lot of them just this past June, were not going to go anywhere voluntarily. They, I understand and respect their beliefs, but they believe they're in Hebron and in Shiloh because God wanted them to be there. And every time there's more people living in those places, it's going to be harder to come to a settlement. Just like every time Palestinians insist on a full right of return, it's going to be harder to come to a settlement. It's not just the Israeli fault, but nor is Israeli should be excused. It's not for us to say what's an impediment. We can say what's an impediment for Israel. The Palestinians should say what's an impediment for them. Then you look at the impediments and you try to deal with them. For us to say settlements aren't an impediment is kind of ridiculous when, on their point. We could say we don't see it as an issue, but they say, yeah, it is an issue. We don't believe, we think they're bluffing, we think that's an excuse. Okay, fine. Then don't add people there. Then give a real settlement freeze. Yes, Netanyahu a few years ago committed to a partial settlement freeze, but it didn't include Jerusalem. It didn't include the expansion of existing settlements. But he did do it, and Abbas did not rise to the challenge. And I give Netanyahu credit for trying, and I criticize Abbas for not trying hard enough. Like I said, no one's blameless here. But I think that we have to understand that from their point of view, it is. Look, here's the thing that pains me the most. There's so many good Israelis. Mm-hmm. So many. But guess what Palestinian kids grow up? The only Israelis they see are zealous, sometimes violent settlers, and people from the IDF. I wish they could see my friends. I wish they could see your friends and all the people that are trying to, first of all, just live their lives, but also live their lives with a purpose. But that's not what's happening now. And we are allowing a generation upon generation to be raised with the most hateful views of Israel. And it's not right, it's not accurate, it's not even fair, but we have to understand that we have a certain complicity in that too, because those are the only people. It's great to have the security barrier to prevent terrorism. It's really, really important, but what it's also done is to prevent discourse and knowing one another. And now you see what happens after these terrible terror attacks, when people only have one idea of who a Jew is. A Jew is only somebody to be killed, and not a Jew is somebody to work with and live with.
Well, the bottom line is we see a lot the same. We see some of it different. But everybody should understand, nobody says it better than you. And it's very important.
Well, the fact that Jews disagree should really not come as a surprise to you.
That's correct. One more issue.
Sure.
So you were one of the driving forces behind Pew. Mm-hmm. And I just want just a sense of where we are as you look at the American Jewish community. And what I hear all the time, Jane, is, we're losing the young people. Mm-hmm. It's strange. If you talk to a lot of people in their 50s and 60s and you say to them, when did you become involved in Jewish life? When I was 40. Mm-hmm. Very often they weren't involved themselves when they were young. Mm-hmm. At the same time, there is a feeling that there is less of a connection and a commitment among young people today. Mm-hmm. And we said earlier, the rate of assimilation is just astronomical. And how intermarriage does or does not drive it, it's certainly a part of it. Mm-hmm. I want to know what at the moment concerns you most as you look at the American Jewish scene, and then I also want to know what gives you the most hope. But first, what concerns you most?
Well, I have to say that the single, for me, most stunning finding in Pew is the accelerated state of intermarriage among conservative but mostly Reform Jews. 82% of the Reform Jews who got married since 2000 married a non-Jew. And I mean, now it's beyond normative. And we don't really know what that's going to mean. Certainly there are plenty of families that retain a connection to Jewish life if one spouse or one partner isn't Jewish. But we also know at least until now that the chances of those families remaining connected, of belonging to a synagogue, of contributing to Jewish causes, of raising their children in a Jewish setting, diminish dramatically if one of the spouses isn't Jewish. So now that's until now. Perhaps we're going to see a new amalgam. I don't know, but I don't think this is just a reform phenomenon. I see it in the conservative movement. Honestly, I see it in my family and among my closest acquaintances. How many children raised in a day school environment are marrying non-Jews, not out of a rejection of who they are, not even out of a feeling that they're moving away. Young people today, and I always feel odd sort of speaking for a generation, but okay, here it goes, believe that you can have multiple identities and that they do not contradict one another. And so, I'm thinking now very specifically of a couple of people whose weddings I hope to attend in the course of the next year. And they are people who I know care very much about being Jewish, and they are going to marry a non-Jewish person who, as far as I know, in each of these cases is not going to convert. And I say to myself, I know these people, I know these young people, and I love them. And I know they love being Jewish, and I know they know what it's like to be Jewish too. So what's going on here? And maybe they're right. It's caused me to really reconsider my own feelings. Maybe they're right. Maybe they can raise a Jewish family in these settings. I don't know. Maybe they're fooling themselves. And look, I've got 3 children. One, my oldest daughter is married to a nice Jewish guy. The 2 other kids, who knows? I would not speak for them. They know my feelings. They're going to do what they want. So this is a very real issue for all of us who aren't in a devoutly Orthodox world. I think for the devoutly Orthodox, it is not as much of an issue at all. So one of the reasons that I care so much about intermarriage is because I care about the future of non-Orthodox Judaism. I think I have great respect for Orthodox Jews, and I think that their adherence to their commitments to being Jewish are profound. But I think that is not going to be the way for everyone. And I think in the last 100 years, we've seen this incredible flowering of expression of non-Orthodox Jewishness, particularly how I feel very strongly that in an egalitarian Judaism, in a Judaism that men and women can access equally and lead equally. And so I worry about that. I don't think there's not going to be any Jews. That's silly. What I worry about is that there won't be a non-Orthodox, if you will, non-fundamentalist alternative that's genuine, that's seeped in Jewish history, that's not superficial, that's real. So that's the thing that I worry about the most. You asked me, what do I find to be the most inspiring thing? I'll tell you, I have become just really, really impressed by the movement of Limud. I'm sure that your viewers are familiar. Limud began 25 years ago in the UK, basically as a way of having Jews there do something over Christmas break, because there's nothing much to do there. It stands for study and teaching, and it's a voluntary gathering that is now spread all over the world. I had the great privilege of being at Limud UK last year, and I was just so impressed. There were thousands of people that came. There was amazing amount of teaching going on, religious, literature, history, dance, performing arts, just everything, film, just everything you can imagine. And all run by volunteers, all run by young volunteers. I think the 2 people who were the coordinators last year were 30 years old. It's just amazing. It is so inspiring. And they take ownership of it. And there are limuds now all over the United States, former Soviet Union, all throughout Europe and South Africa and Israel even. I was recently, just the last couple of weeks ago, I was in Poland. And there's now a limud in Poland.
Wow.
And it is the most popular thing for not just Jews, for anybody
Yes.
who's interested in Jewish stuff. And here's what I was told by the person who organizes it, and it's actually going on right now. But she said that they opened up registration online at midnight a few weeks prior to this. And by 6 a.m., all the spots had been filled. In 6 hours, in the middle of the night, people were signing up to come to this.
Amazing.
And that is so inspirational. So what is that telling us? I mean, you have to sort of step back and say, okay, so what's the lesson here? I think we are seeing among those who care about it a hunger for knowledge, for deep knowledge and learning. And, you know, that spans denominations. You know, even now the chief rabbi of the UK is going to Limud. Ephraim Mervis, the new chief rabbi. He was there last year, and I noticed that he's back on the schedule for this year. That is huge. That's a huge validation of saying that, yes, even though there are men and women who study together, and even though it doesn't always adhere to certain Orthodox principles, that he wants to be a part of it. He's very smart to do that because he realizes that that's like the beating heart of where things are there. And I think we're seeing that all sorts of people, young and old, it's such a multi-generational event, really want Jewish substance. And they want it from all perspectives. It could be religious, could be culture, could be food, whatever. I have friends who teach dance at Limud UK every year. It's amazing who shows up. So
we should say about it, one should imagine a hotel that for 3 days is taken over by these hundreds of Jews who come. And in every room, there's another class, another study.
Oh, there's like 10 or 12 things going on at the same time.
Right.
The biggest regret you have is that you can't
be
go
everywhere.
to. And believe me, the UK Limud, I mean, you see how much I love it. It's in a university. It's really cold. The food is horrible. I'm sorry, it's horrible.
And it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter at all. And guess what? Everybody goes by the first name. Everybody eats in the dining room. Everybody busses their tables. It's like a big learning kibbutz. It's amazing. So I think it's telling us that people want substance, but it's also telling us something else that's really important, that people want to work for it, that they want to volunteer. Even the volunteerism may be organizing the whole thing, or it may be picking up your tray and moving it after dinner. But I think that's an important message, because too much, I think, of what has of the message that's come from the Jewish establishment in America towards young people is, hey, Judaism, it's free. You can do anything. You can get books. You can study. You can go to Israel. You don't have to do anything. You just come. And it's not that. You know, we have rights and we have responsibilities. And it is true that if you have to do something, if you have to give a little money, if you have to volunteer, if you have to pay into something, you care about it more, you value it more. We're a nation, we're a capitalist country here, you know. You measure what you value, and you value what you measure. And I think Limud is also sending us a message that people want to be asked to step up.
Interesting.
They want to be asked to own it. So I am just continually impressed by this movement, and I think it is something that gives me great hope.
Jane Eisner, you're fabulous.
Thank you, Mark. So are you.
No, you're absolutely fabulous. The work you do at the Forward, the work you've done in journalism, the work you do, just spreading the message is extraordinary.
Well, it's a great privilege.
I wish you kol tuva hatzlacha. You just go from strength to strength.
Thank you.
And whenever it's possible, I know how hectic your life is. Every now and then you should sit in that chair and share with us.
My pleasure.
It's an honor to sit with you.
Thank you.
Really, thank you
so
very,
much.
very much.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Jane Eisner, editor-in-chief of The Forward, and an individual making a contribution to Jewish life today that is unparalleled. I hope you enjoyed meeting her. Of course, as always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed by Jane Eisner. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you and reading your comments on the air. And so until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV on JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.